Friends, welcome back to Love Wrestling. Here with someone that I am super, super excited to chat with. I would have been excited anytime, but so much great stuff going on in the individual. To my right's life in their life in pro wrestling and everything in between. Russian Dynamite, Masha Slamovich joining me. It is so, so cool to chat with you, especially like we're going to get into right after you debut for AEW. You're getting ready to get your first match for the NWA under your belt. We'll get into that in a second, though. How are you doing? Thanks for the time.
I'm doing real well. Thank you. Busy, good kind of busy, like I said.
But it's a good problem to have, especially coming out of, the situation we were all in, to put the last 15 months pretty lightly. How's it been to really be back to things full force, be in front of crowds again, really be back to doing what you love to 110%?
Man, I was lucky enough to be wrestling with Marvelous, so I was really lucky to only be away from crowds for like 3 months,
Cool.
but it was still like very weird and COVID-y for the last while. But to be back in full swing, I'm absolutely ready to dive nose deep into this coming weekend, which is GSW Global Festival Night 1 and 2, and immediately after that, Beyond American Rana is going to be on Sunday. Thoroughly looking forward to having a sold out place and going absolutely crazy. So I'm pumped.
Well, like you said, if you had 3 feet, you would have dove in with all three of them. You know what I mean? Because you're everywhere right now, including on, at the time of this recording, last night's AEW Dark. What was it like for you to debut for the promotion, especially, the rumors out there, how exciting a time it is for the promotion as a whole?
It was a really incredible experience. I didn't really know it was coming. It totally caught me by surprise. I had like a day and a half, 2 days notice about it.
Really?
So I didn't know as much as the rest of y'all didn't know, and I tried to keep it real quiet. Went and did it, and when it happened, it blew up. So it was really great just being there and experiencing AEW and actually going out there and wrestling was really awesome, and I certainly hope for more of that in the future.
It was really cool to see you square off with Penelope Ford as well, because I'm a personal mark, let's just use the wrestling term for it, a huge fan of hers. What was it like stepping in the ring with her?
It was really great because the last time we wrestled was like 2016, 17. So it's been quite a few years since we shared the ring together, and it was really awesome to do so on such a grand stage. Again, had a great time wrestling her, would totally do it again.
Where do you feel maybe in those 4 or 5 years since you last wrestled her, maybe you grew most as a professional wrestler? Obviously, getting your reps in and getting inside the ring in front of fans more has to help. But where do you feel you've developed most or shown the most improvement in your opinion?
Everything all around. I feel like the biggest thing that has happened to me has been, moving to Japan for a year and living and training and wrestling with Marvelous Pro Wrestling, because it took me, from here to like completely the next level. I changed as a person, as a performer, as a wrestler in every sense of the word. So, I really owe it all to Japan, and I've always been drawn to that kind of style, that kind of life. So I don't know, it all feels like it all worked out and came full circle.
Well, and you're a student of the game. That continues now with the work you're doing with Mission Pro Wrestling. It was pretty cool to see Thunder Rosa come out and make the save last night. Talk a little bit about your training there and her influence on the women's wrestling scene as a whole. Obviously, it's pretty tangible to an outsider, but getting the opportunity to ask you firsthand is something I'm certainly taking up.
I love working with Thunder Rosa, be it in, be it in the dojo, where I was lucky enough for her to allow me to guest coach, and I was training there leading up to Bloodsport as well, and of course wrestling for Mission Pro, and I got the chance to wrestle Thunder Rosa at Texas Wrestling League. So me and Thunder are really familiar with each other, and she's been such a great help and a mentor to me ever since I came back from Japan, and really happy to have her come make the save for me at AEW last night.
Well, and again, it's a nice little tie-in. You know, you talk about the kismet of professional wrestling, but a former NWA Women's Champion making the save for you a week before you're set to make your debut for the NWA. You're hopping in the Women's Invitational. Again, maybe just a little bit on the experience, how excited you are for that on the precipice of what's going to be a really cool event for them.
I am really, really excited. And like you said, this is not only a cool, but also a historic event with having the first Invitational Cup, them bringing Mildred Burke's title. I think it's going to be a really, really awesome weekend, especially with the anniversary of NWA also going down in 2 weeks at the Chase in St. Louis. So I hope everybody has their eyes set on that.
Now, let's say you come out of the Women's Invitational as the winner. You get to face off with either Camille or legit Layla Hirsch the next evening. Have you had the opportunity to step into the ring with either of them? Maybe do you have a preference, a strategy for either, or are you just focusing on the match ahead and then maybe worried about the championship after?
Well, myself and Layla Hirsch actually wrestled at Mission Pro back in March, I believe. And nobody won that match. It was actually a draw. So me and Layla are 0-0 at a tie with each other. And I would be more than happy to prove who the better Russian is at NWA the next night. And as for Camille, I have not shared the ring with her. However, I've seen her work and she's quite impressive. And I'm ready to be the next one to step up and give her a run for her money, give her a challenge.
It's pretty cool that you've got sort of wildly different potential opponents in that end, because something I've really loved about watching you wrestle is, yes, you're a very powerful woman. That's what maybe people would box you in as, but there's really not a style of pro wrestling that you can't work. Is that maybe something you attribute to going out and working with Marvelous and working with Thunder and working with so many different trainers you're traveling, or is it maybe just a point of pride that you consciously said, I want to be able to do everything, is the best way that I can put it?
I definitely think it's a mix of both. Of course, it has to do with my international experience and having to wrestle so many different places, different styles, different opponents. But it also definitely stems from my beginnings at Johnny Rod's, where, I was told you have to be ready for anything, you have to be ready to work any kind of style. So I made it a point to not only learn everything that I could, but also to try to teach myself, to repeat everything. If you do it on this way, you do it this way. I had to teach myself just to be very fluent in the language of pro wrestling in any style. And that's definitely come in handy for me because I feel like there isn't an opponent that I can't match up and take on.
I like the one quote that I came across. You said, you're never going to do something perfectly every time. If you do it perfectly 1,000 times, you're going to fuck it up 1,000 times, which I think is just very, very cool. It's sort of, really just gives a line for exactly what you stand for in pro wrestling, in my opinion. But you brought up Johnny Rods, and I have to bring up, if you're bringing him up, Sam Leterna, because I had her on the show a couple of months ago. I don't need to tell you that she's a wonderful individual, but she was telling me that you were really the conduit for her getting into broadcasting and really sort of pushing her when she had a low moment in professional wrestling. So again, if I've got you, I've got to get the scoop on that end, or maybe a little bit of your insight into that conversation, because obviously, and again, I don't need to tell you, but she being in professional wrestling broadcasting is just an asset to the industry.
She is 100% an asset to this industry. And she is right about what she says, because I remember, we've had that conversation gingerly a couple of times, and then there really came a point where it was go for it or don't. And I told her, she would be doing a disservice of the business of professional wrestling if she were to exit from it. I said, hey man, if in-ring competition isn't your thing, I still think that you have so much to give. I was like, just because you aren't going to be the next Charlotte Flair or the Bella Twins, I don't know, it doesn't mean that you don't have something to give. And I was like, you have such a well-spoken voice. You are a beautiful woman. I'm like, you need to be commentating, broadcasting, announcing. And, she came up with Wrestle T, and I supported her since day one. And she's absolutely took the ball and ran with it. She's grown herself into, one of the best broadcasters in independent wrestling. And I certainly hope that every promotion listening will be using her in some form.
I completely agree. And it ties me over nicely, because you described earlier there that professional wrestling is life. Tell me about your wrestling over everything tattoo. When did you get it? What inspired it? Because it's just, again, something that I think sums you up very nicely.
Yep. So this is the tattoo in question. It is on my ring finger because it's like a ring. Because I always say I'm married to pro wrestling. Um, I got the tattoo at some point in 2019. Must have been like October, November-ish, probably. Um, it just, it means exactly what it says to me. It means that wrestling is my purpose on this planet. I always say that if God gives you a gift and you don't use it, you're committing a sin. And I feel like that this is my gift. Professional wrestling is what I have to offer from myself to the greater good of the world, or spreading the gospel of pro wrestling. So, that's what it is. I feel like it brings joy to my life. It gives me purpose. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do. So it always has to stay in the forefront, in the middle of everything that I do. And I must not stray from that.
Hearing that, how cool was it for you to get the opportunity to wrestle in your hometown? Because it seems like that would be one of those things for a pro wrestler that, is a bucket list item or an I made it item or whatever, nomenclature you want to put on top of it. What did it mean to you to wrestle in Moscow?
Well, I actually have wrestled in Moscow. I am lucky enough to be able to say I've wrestled in both of my hometowns. I wrestled at the Melrose Ballroom for Impact back in 2019, which is in New York City, which is one of my places of residence, and the other one being Moscow, Russia, where I wrestled for IWF Russia in 2019 in January. And, I certainly hope I get to do it again. We were discussing plans for 2022, perhaps. So it would be really cool to wrestle in Moscow again. And, there's a bunch of shows coming to the New York area. So let's speak that into fruition as well.
Absolutely. Let's get that one out there. Is there an independent scene in Russia? Because you hear about the British wrestling scene and Australian and Canadian wrestling scene that I'm going to ask you about here in a second. But I've never heard anything, admittedly, of the Russian independent scene outside of course, Russian Dynamite herself. So maybe give me a little bit on it. If there's a burgeoning scene, if it's a big scene right now, or if it's maybe an opportunity for pro wrestling to grow a little.
It's definitely an opportunity for it to grow a little bit there, especially right now with people like myself, Layla Hirsch, Natalia Markova, Ivan Dragunov. All the Russians are coming out of the crevices to wrestle, and that is fantastic. I'd love to see more Russian wrestlers make it and represent. Our independent scene is quite small. We pretty much only have IWF Russia, like I mentioned, in Moscow, and North Star Wrestling in St. Petersburg. Everything else is like deathmatch, backyard, ultra violent, which is also awesome.
Very one way or the other.
Yeah. So if we're talking like, like the indie scene, it would be those two promotions. You can find them on Instagram and check them out.
Now, I mentioned off the bat, we were chatting before we started recording that you've been up to Canada a couple of times. That's why I was lucky enough to find out about you a little earlier in your career than most, which is great for me. What are your memories of being up here? Hopefully, are we going to get you back up here sooner rather than later?
Absolutely. I have such a storied history wrestling up in Canada. And, I've had a bunch of Canadian wrestlers who have helped me pretty much to get to where I am, and have been mentors in and out of the ring with like advice and stuff. So I greatly owe my success to my experiences in Canada. And I've always said that I felt like I was somewhat of a path following the wrestlers who've inspired me. And apparently doing my time up in Canada was definitely a part of that. I got to wrestle in the Maritimes. I got to wrestle in Quebec, Manitoba, Ontario, and, most famously do the Winter Death Tour, which I did for 6.5 weeks with CWF based in Ontario, but we went all across Canada, and boy, do I have some stories from them.
I was going to say, like, I will never, I can tell you, wrestle in my life, nonetheless, do a tour like that. But don't you guys like quite literally get to like the edge of the Arctic Circle with that?
Yes, if you guys want to entertain yourselves, and go on Google Maps and look up a place called Angling Lake. That was the most northern point of our tour and that year. It was all the way, way up in northern Ontario. It was like negative 43 degrees outside. So, man, it's crazy. Like, looking back at it, I'm like, you really gotta love wrestling and hate yourself to do something like that. I mean, it was nuts, but I wouldn't trade the experience for the world. It was such an amazing experience, and it definitely played a part in growing me as a wrestler and as a person.
Now, I'm speculating a little bit here, but you did an interview a couple of years ago where you said that you quite literally kept Dynamite Kid's book in your bag. Did it maybe mean a little bit extra to be, you didn't make it all the way out till Calgary yet, but did it mean a little extra to be in the Great White North? Like, hearing something like that, I would have to assume he was a pretty big influence, and maybe the Hearts as a whole.
100%. They were all such an influence, especially when I was growing up. I love that style of wrestling. I watched like so much of like the Hart stuff, and I would Google about like Stu Hart and try to like dig through the internet for stuff.
Yeah.
And it meant so much. I wish I had gotten to go to Calgary. I will wrestle in Calgary one day. I'm manifesting that to happen.
I will do my best to make that happen too. I'm saying her here. I promise you that.
Yes. But I do still keep his book in my bag for good luck. I brought it to AEW with me. And, it did mean a lot to me because, like I said, I felt like I was following a certain path, and, Dynamite Kid, Benoit, and I feel like that Dynamite blood runs deep.
I love it, friend. I know you're wrestling a number of different places, and of course, I'm going to let you plug where you can find you in the near future at the end of this. But I specifically wanted to close this out by asking about Camp Leapfrog, because I know you've worked with them quite a bit in the past, and I think they're just such a cool promotion, putting on great matches, but in a very untraditional way in some ways. So maybe just a little bit on your experience there, of course, where people can see you on Camp Leapfrog, but maybe lead into where people can keep track of Russian Dynamite in the near future.
Well, in regards to Camp Leapfrog, it's probably one of the most interesting places that I currently wrestle, because I never have any idea what to expect of what the hell they're going to want from me. Camp Leapfrog never ceases to make me question what in God's name I'm doing in a ring. So it's great, and we'll see where it's going, because we've just had the first live Camp Leapfrog event, which went off rather well. So we'll see where that goes. As for the rest of my shows, we've got so much good stuff coming up. We've got Beyond American Rana this weekend, like I said earlier. We've got NWA. We've got Borscht at the Beach coming next month. You can keep track of all of that if you follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook pages at Masha Slamovich. Y'all can get my t-shirts at Pro Wrestling Tees at Masha Slamovich. And of course, for all the exclusive content, unreleased matches from Marvelous in Japan, calendars, merch updates, go subscribe to my Patreon at Masha Slamovich. We'll have a new photo shoot dropping tonight. So, and every other night. So whenever this airs, it's still relevant. Come join us.
You have done a few interviews today. I didn't even need to ask you for the social media plugs to close the show out, which is yet another reason you have been a great guest, and one that I am super, super excited to have back on. Hopefully we can get the in-person interview when we've got you here in Calgary in the near future. That would cross a lot of items, I think, off of both yours and I's respective lists of things we've got to do in the near future. But until then, friend, it's been an absolute blast, and thanks again for the time.
Thank you, and have a great day.
You too, friends. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to stay up to date with the latest and greatest from Masha, you can find all the links to her socials, her Patreon, and everything in between in the description below. And if you want to continue to stay up to date with Love Wrestling, feel free to give us a follow wherever video is viewed or audio is played at Love Wrestling CA. For Russian Dynamite, Masha Slamovich, I have been Spencer Love. Thanks for tuning in, friends. We'll see you on the next one.